The sirens came first, braided with thunder, running ahead of the storm like a pack of dogs that had slipped the leash. Rain slammed sideways across the river. On the Randolph Bridge, a city bus coughed, lurched, and died with its nose over the railing. Inside, kids pressed their hands to fogged glass while the driver pumped the brake the way you talk to a stubborn friend. One more time, come on. Miles Carter hit the door with his shoulder and a breath he'd been saving for emergencies. Paramedic jacket soaked through, kit banging against his thigh, he shouted through the rubber lip of the seal. Chicago fire. I've got you. Open up. The mechanism stuttered to life and the door folded back. Heat and panic poured out. Miles planted himself in the aisle, voice dropping into that practiced calm that made people obey without realizing it. We're okay. We're moving in threes. You, pink backpack, you're my leader. Take 2 and follow me. Nobody runs. Walking is our superpower. They were halfway through when the sky changed. Not lightning. A white gouge ripped the clouds from west to east. Too straight, too fast, dragging a tail of burning air. Heads tipped back as one. Someone said, "Is that a—" and the rest of the sentence drowned as the fireball knifed past the black angle of the Willis Tower and slammed into the river. Sound rolled over them like a collapsing building. Water heaved up, a wall taller than the bus, and the bridge groaned a long, low note as metal learned a new shape. The driver yanked the parking brake. Tires lifted. The world tilted. The wave did not hit. It rose and held, as if the river had found hands. Through the spray, a figure shouldered up and out, hair plastered to her cheeks, eyes bright and confused and stubborn. She stood in the river as if the bottom had remembered her. Water sheeted off her arms as she pushed, guiding the bus back onto the deck until rubber found asphalt and stuck. Every phone on the bridge tried to become a camera at once. 1,000 rectangles blinked awake. The figure, girl, woman young enough to make Miles feel 30 and old enough to have seen things, stumbled to the railing and vaulted it like a hurdle. She landed hard, winced, and still got there in time to catch a little boy toppling out of the bus door on shaky legs. She handed him to Miles. "Are you hurt?" Miles asked. It came out automatic, a reflex older than a name. She looked up like she was cataloging a planet. Her gaze flicked to the red emergency bulb strung across the bridge, then to the sick slice of real daylight between stacks of cloud. "Gravity's heavier," she said. Her voice had a careful accent, as if English were a coat she'd borrowed. "I'm okay. I think." "You just lifted a bus," someone breathed. The girl flinched like the words were too loud. "It needed lifting," she said, almost apologetic. On the sidewalk, Jade Reyes had already gone live. Hair plastered to her forehead, phone in one hand, she spoke to the lens like it was a friend who always picked up. "Chicago," she said, keeping her voice steady by force. "I am on Randolph. A woman just pulled a bus out of the river. I am not kidding. Look." The camera swung and caught the stranger in a wash of red flare and pale daylight. For a second, the image looked like a painting of a miracle done on wet canvas. Colors bleeding, edges not yet agreed upon. The chat detonated. Hearts slid up the screen like confetti and then collapsed into a single repeating question. "Who?" "Name?" Miles asked, still assessing, fingers gentle at her wrist, counting beats. "Strong. Fast. Not normal." "Kara," she said, and tried to stand straighter, like names were a posture. "Kara is fine." A thunderclap ricocheted down the river canyon. Rain came in harder, thicker. A second surge shoved at the bus tires. The bridge snapped and complained. Miles threw a look at the driver. "We're off the bridge now. Go. Go." Kara was already in motion. She ripped a bent section of railing away with a sound like a zipper on a giant's jacket, cleared a path. People slid past her with the dazed politeness of survivors at a buffet. A teenage girl paused, raised her phone for a selfie on instinct, then lowered it, shame and/or wrestling on her face. "Thank you," she whispered instead. Kara smiled at her like that word mattered more than oxygen. Sirens converged. Squad cars, engines, a rescue boat shouldering the current. Agent Cole Davenport stepped out of an unmarked SUV in a rain-dark suit and the flat expression of a man taught to see 6 problems at once. He took in the bus, the hole in the sky where the fire had torn through, the woman whose hands were still bleeding river. He moved toward her with caution that didn't quite make it into fear. "Ma'am," he said, badge balanced in his palm so she could read it without being forced to. "I'm Cole Davenport. Department of—" He stopped himself. The agency didn't matter. "Are you hurt?" "She says she's okay," Miles answered, reflexively protective now, as if bureaucracy were a sharp edge and he had a towel. "Vitals are wild but good." Davenport's gaze slid to the wall of phones. He had the unhappy air of a man about to try to put toothpaste back in a tube. "Folks, I need you to step back. Please. Ma'am, Kara, would you come with us? We have a shelter 2 blocks up. Dry. Safe." Jade edged closer, lens up, voice soft. "Kara, I'm Jade. I'm live right now. Do you want to say anything?" Kara glanced between them all. The badges, the cameras, the boy still clinging to Miles's jacket. The rain slicked her eyelashes into spikes. "I want to help," she said. "Where do you keep the hurt?" The answer to that was everywhere. Davenport watched the crowd and did the math. The only way to stop this from becoming a stampede was to move. "We walk together," he said. "Miles, you flank. Ms. Reyes, Jade. You can come if you keep it from turning into a circus." "Circles only," Jade said. "Promise." They went fast down the slick street, sirens shaping the space in front of them. People parted and formed again, hungry for a closer look at the story happening in their zip code. Kara moved with a runner's grace and a fighter's caution, jaw set against the rain, glancing up whenever the cloud deck thinned as if she could drink light. At the high school gym, the big doors stood open to the storm and to everyone it had invited. Generators growled. Cots lined the basketball court like sentences waiting to be finished. Volunteers shoved tables into a semblance of a kitchen and pretended they didn't see the ceiling leak. Children collected in corners like marbles. Red emergency bulbs threw a film over everything, the whole space bruised. Kara crossed the threshold and faltered as if the floor had risen under her. It wasn't the crowd. It was the red. Something in that color laid fingers on her bones and pressed. She reached for a folding chair and missed. Miles was already there. "Hey," he murmured, steering her toward the wall where a blown window let in a thin, honest stripe of daylight. "Better." She stepped into it and exhaled. "Yes," she said. "I'm sorry. Your lights are wrong for me." Naomi Park shouldered through with a graduate student's bun stabbed through with 2 pens and a phone full of solar maps. "I'm the physicist the mayor harassed awake," she announced without introduction. Her eyes flicked from Kara to the red bulbs to the gray outside. She marched to the doors and shoved them wider. Wind punched in, so did a little more day. Naomi angled a folding mirror from the nurse's station to widen the stripe until it was a puddle. Kara stood in it and color returned to her cheeks like a tide stepping back onto a familiar beach. Davenport posted 2 agents at the entrance and turned to the volunteers. "Phones down, please," he called, aiming for imploring instead of authoritarian and landing somewhere in between. "No photos inside. Let's give people room to breathe." "Too late," Jade muttered, still filming but holding the lens low, catching hands handing out blankets and the small square of light where a stranger steadied. The chat flooded again. Where did she come from? Is she safe? Is she ours? And Jade moderated like a goalie against hysteria, pinning the conversation to first names and water donations. Kara watched a little boy in a dinosaur hoodie stop crying as a volunteer knelt to tie his shoe and felt her own breath even out. She turned to Davenport. "I will answer questions," she said. "After them." She nodded toward the crowd. "They go first." "You may not get a later," Davenport said, not unkindly. "Then we use the now," Kara replied, and crossed to the tables where a woman in a wet cub's cap was trying to lift 2 cases of bottled water by herself. Kara took both as if they were empty and smiled without showing off. The woman stared, mouth open, then laughed, a startled, delighted sound that bounced off the gym rafters and made other people laugh because someone had gone first. A boy hovered at the edge of the light puddle, clutching a blanket and a decision. He edged closer. "Are you an angel?" he asked, all air and courage. Kara crouched to put her eyes level with his. No, she said. But I like them. What are you then? I'm Kara, she said. And you? Kendrick. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. My mom says thank you. Tell her she's welcome, Kara said. Tell her I'll keep going. Davenport watched from a step away, thumb worrying the edge of his ID, face divided between the part that wanted to protect and the part that had been taught to contain. He checked his phone. The storm track was ugly. The feeds were worse. A defense contractor he didn't like had already left 2 voicemails. He looked back at the woman in the daylight puddle and, for a second, let the training go quiet. If this was a threat, it was a strange one, making people gentler instead of sharper. Okay, he said at last, moving closer. Kara, when you're ready, we'll find another room. We need to understand. Well, we need to understand you. Kara nodded, not offended. I also need to understand me, she said, a little laugh at the end like she couldn't help it. Jade clicked her stream off and tucked the phone away for the first time since the bridge. I can do a sit-down, she told Davenport, unexpectedly diplomatic. No lights, no gotchas. Let her be a person before she's a headline. Naomi pointed at the puddle of sunlight like a conductor at the first violin. We keep that angle open. Red spectrum is draining her. Daylight is restoring. It's not exactly photosynthesis, but it's cousin to it. I'll need a better spectrometer. Miles handed Kara a paper cup of terrible coffee and made a face to warn her. She sipped, grimaced, and laughed properly this time, which made 2 cots worth of people smile without knowing why. Somewhere outside, deep under the hum of generators and the wet drum of rain, Steele screamed. Kara's head snapped toward the sound as if someone had plucked a wire inside her chest. Her eyes went unfocused for a heartbeat, listening to a thing most people never hear. Something's failing, she said, voice suddenly very calm. Davenport followed her gaze to the doors and the gray slice beyond. Where? She swallowed, already moving toward the light. Out there, she said. I think a bridge is trying not to fall. Kara didn't wait for permission. She stepped out of the light puddle and into the rain, the gym's heat peeling off her skin in a wave, and ran. Miles grabbed his kit, Jade scooped her phone with a grimace that meant she was about to film and not exploit, and Davenport called for a perimeter, already moving, already arguing with a voice in his earpiece about optics and safety and the fact that safety was the only optic that mattered. The street pitched downhill toward the river, slick with a film of oil that turned the pavement into a rumor. Wind shouldered them. At the corner, a battered deli sign clanged 6 inches from Kara's head. Her hand flashed and stilled it with 2 fingers as gently as stopping a metronome. She didn't notice she'd done it. Her eyes were on the river canyons and the way noise traveled along Steele. The bridge in trouble wasn't Randolph this time. It was 2 spans south, an old workhorse with rivets that had outlived their designers. A towboat had gotten frisky in the crosswind and nudged a pier just enough to make the deck remember gravity. Cars stacked in a shy, panicked accordion. A hatchback teetered on a lip of steel that had been rode a minute ago and now looked a lot like a trapdoor. Kara didn't slow. She vaulted the Jersey barrier, caught the rail, and swung out over the water. The rain hammered up under the deck like applause. People on both banks shouted things that were mostly the shape of her name, even if they didn't know it yet. Where do you want us? Miles yelled to Davenport, already deciding his own answer, which was everywhere and right there and the side with the children. Hold the sidewalks, keep the load off the deck, Davenport said into his radio, then to a motor officer whose lights poured red all over the scene. Kill the reds and give me white floods on the east side. Now. The officer blinked. She weakens under red, Davenport added, and didn't examine where that certainty had come from. The red stuttered and died. White cones snapped on, clean and ugly, and the bridge's shadow retreated an inch. Kara slid under the sagging span, set her shoulder into a beam that felt like it had inherited a history of freight train complaints, and pushed. The sound it made was not heroic. It was stubborn and pained and complicated, like an orchestra tuning in a storm. The hatchback rocked back onto its tires. The driver, gray-knuckled and crying without tears, stared at the shape in the rain like a shouldn't that had become an is. Put it in park, Kara called up, voice steady, breath under control by decision, not by ease. Then walk forward slow. You're okay. Jade was at the edge of the closure, phone high but angled away from faces, catching hands, shoes, the tension in a bridge you could almost see. Her chat begged for a close-up. She ignored them. You can wait, she told a million strangers. She can't. A metal cable snapped and rode a new crack across the sky. One end whipped, carving a bright line through rain. Kara turned her head a fraction and let it glance her jaw, then caught the tail on the backswing. The cable thrummed in her hands like something alive and furious. She hooked it around a bearing with a move that made sense to both her muscles and the bridge, a knot stolen from a memory of a cousin teaching her how to tie down freight on a world that didn't exist here. Get the weight off the center, Miles shouted, voice even as he guided people 2 by 2, always touching an elbow, always keeping himself between them and the drop. A kid in a soaked hoodie clutched a plastic terrarium with a turtle inside it. Miles reached for it. The kid shook his head, defiance and fear locked in a draw. Okay, Miles said, serious. You keep him. He's part of the team. Davenport's agents moved like chess pieces you didn't notice until the board looked safer. One stationed at the hinge cut the cone. One cleared a stalled van whose driver had thought about flooring it and then seen the river's dark eye looking up at him and reconsidered. On the far side, an older man in a flat cap stood too still at the railing, eyes shut like he was trying to rewrite the day by concentration. Davenport crossed to him in a slow arc, palms out. Sir, he said, come with me. The man opened his eyes, found the badge, and nodded as if indignity had been avoided. Under the deck, Kara's arms burned. Not a mortal burn, but the kind of complaint a body files when it is being used like an idea instead of a machine. The clouds shifted. A pale band of daylight fell across her shoulder and neck and soaked into her skin like a chemical reaction you didn't need lab goggles to appreciate. The shiver left her hands. Steel, for a moment, felt negotiable. Clear, Miles called and meant it. The last car crawled off and someone started clapping because sometimes the human body needs to clap or it won't understand what just happened. The bridge settled into a sulk rather than a collapse. Kara eased out from under it and dropped to the bank, mud sucking at her shoes. For a second she swayed, like a person who had stood up too fast. Then she grinned at a toddler who had both fists full of goldfish crackers and was assessing whether this glowing stranger was better or worse than cartoons. Hi, Kara said, as if there were time for hi. The toddler solemnly offered a cracker. Kara accepted with reverence, as if it were the coin that bought her the rest of the day. They kept moving, not heroes but a small, quickly formed organism. Kara at the point where physics argued, Miles where panic spiked, Jade where understanding could be ferried between a scene and the rest of the world, Davenport where a choice needed a spine, Naomi everywhere the light could be angled right with mirrors and open doors and the occasional bossy command. They lifted a streetlight off a crushed hood. They unspooled a rope to haul a dinghy along flooded basements. Kara carried an elderly woman down 5 flights of stairs and never mentioned how the woman's fingers left small crescents of nail in her jacket. At one intersection, a traffic camera tore loose and pendulumed low. Kara plucked it, handed it to the officer below, and asked, honestly curious, how many of those you have. Between calls, Naomi's voice arrived via speaker, out of breath and delighted by her own speed. I've pulled NOAA imagery and insolation charts. If cloud cover thins along the south edge in 20, you get a bump. Fall back north if you start to feel that thing you feel. The wrongness, Kara asked, appreciative that someone had given it a word. Right. The red lights aren't pure red, but the spectrum is concentrated enough to drain you. The white floods scatter intensity thinner across wavelengths. We'll swap bulbs later. Add it to the list. What list? Jade panted, vaulting a barricade and catching the leg of a wobbling news stand as a gust tried to make it fly. The one where we fix the things we can, Naomi said, and hung up to go fix another. By late afternoon, the storm broke into ragged bands. The light came harsh and golden through a torn place in the sky. Kara rose without meaning to, feet lifting from the wet pavement like she had been on a gentle elevator all along and had just stopped pretending otherwise. She hovered knee-high, then chest-high, then laughed, startled, and flailed like any other person who discovers a second gravity. Miles reached up, and she took his hand out of instinct, an anchor just until the part of her that understood the air found its balance. "You're flying," Jade whispered, "because sometimes the obvious needs a narrator." Kara's hair snapped in the wind. She let go and trusted herself. The smile that found her face wasn't for cameras or gratitude or politics. It was the expression of a system clicking into alignment. She drifted up to the level of the torn banner snagged on a lamppost, freed it with a quick twist, and let it stream like a signal that meant something softer than victory and harder than luck. The first real test of that height arrived 3 blocks later. A delivery truck had tried to beat a flood down a ramp into a parking garage and lost the bet. Water, brown and angry, surged around the hood. The driver clung to the doorframe with white fingers as the truck seesawed. The back corner dipped and the whole thing began to pivot toward a wall. "Don't wait," Davenport said, not to Kara, who was already above the ramp, but to himself as if to put his badge on the record. "Do it." Kara dove. The wind shoved at her flank. She corrected midair like someone who had always been good at learning fast. She gripped the truck's bumper and lifted just enough to change the angle. Not a heroic one-hand and a wink hoist, just the exact application of force required to make physics apologize for a minute. Miles splashed in up to his knees and threw the driver a strap. Jade anchored them both by bracing against a pillar and learning the weight of 3 lives down her spine. The truck settled, the driver sobbed into Miles's shoulder because that's where human bodies aim in emergencies, and the water made an ugly joke about where it wanted to go next. When it was over, they all stood a little too close together, pretending they were wringing out sleeves because acknowledging that they were trembling would have cracked something too early in the day. Kara flexed her fingers. The scrape on her jaw from the whip of cable had already vanished, the skin there warm in a way that made Naomi's inner scientist hum. The sun was a coin now, a dirty nickel dropped into the slot of cloud. Enough. Word had outrun them. On the next block a crowd formed without planning to. People with casseroles and extension cords, and a sign someone had printed on office paper that just said thank you, which was embarrassingly earnest and exactly right. A little boy wearing a dinosaur hoodie pointed at Kara and didn't ask for a photo. He lifted his terrarium instead, proud. "His name is Crush," he announced. "He's safe." "He looks very brave," Kara said, and meant it. Davenport's phone buzzed with a call flagged priority from a number he wished he didn't recognize. He let it buzz out. Another came, this one from City Hall, which he took while walking 3 steps away and keeping everyone in his peripheral vision. He said words like coordination and mutual aid, and then, when the voice on the other end cleared its throat and changed subjects to shelf-stable procurement and security vendors who happened to be very interested in spectrum-based control, he said, very quietly, "Not now." When he came back, his face was set to something that looked like resolve with a sore tooth. The weather eased in fits, like a stubborn machine finally remembering its design. They made smaller rescues after that, quiet ones that do not go viral. Finding a pharmacy's backroom insulin and moving it to a generator, stacking sandbags where a basement wall bowed, holding the hand of an elderly man whose wife was 2 blocks away and unreachable, and then making her reachable with 3 phone calls and Jade's ability to make a stranger want to help. The day softened at the edges. People began telling jokes they hadn't earned and then earned them anyway by laughing without guilt. At dusk, they drifted back to the shelter where the gym still glowed with that smeared, red-tinged light, and Naomi had installed 3 borrowed floor lamps with daylight bulbs aimed like sunflowers at the places where Kara tended to stand. Someone had put a pot of something on to simmer in a borrowed slow cooker. It smelled like comfort with extra salt. Kara took a bowl, inhaled steam, and remembered she had a mouth for something other than breath and names. Jade slid into the chair beside her and set the phone face down. For the first time since the bridge, she wasn't broadcasting. "When you're ready," she said, "I want to ask you things people will ask anyway. But I'll let you pick the order." "What if I don't know the answers?" Kara asked. Spoon paused halfway. "Then we show them how unanswered looks," Jade said. "It's still honest." Davenport leaned a shoulder against the wall and pretended to be reading a briefing while actually watching the room calculate a new normal. He caught Miles's eye and lifted an eyebrow that meant, in his dialect, "I will try not to ruin what you're building." Miles nodded in his, which translated to "We'll tell you when you're about to." The generator coughed, the lights dipped, and then recovered. For a heartbeat the gym flashed deeper red, and Kara's spoon trembled in her hand as if a string had been plucked inside her. Naomi noticed from across the room and made a note on a yellow sticky that she then jabbed onto Davenport's briefing as she passed. Replace bulbs tonight. Rain kept a polite distance from the windows, a soft hiss instead of a shout. On a muted TV, a panel of faces argued with impeccable diction about responsibility and the unknown. The Chiron didn't say her name. It said a word that made her shrink inside a little. Jade reached over without looking and tapped the power button, and the room seemed to inhale. Kara looked at the people in the cots and the volunteers trying to become an assembly line and the small galaxy of lives swirling around a gym that had decided to be a miracle. She swallowed the last of the soup and set the bowl aside. "Okay," she said to Jade. "Ask me." Jade nodded once, serious as if taking an oath, and was just drawing breath when a new sound threaded the gym, high and insistent, not siren and not thunder. Phones lit up, pinging in a ragged chorus. A push alert from the city scrolled across a dozen screens at once, words tumbling over each other. Relief concert scheduled for tomorrow at Navy Pier, a show of resilience, a test of emergency lighting systems in partnership with private industry. Naomi's pen stopped mid-scratch. Davenport's jaw clicked. Miles made a noise low in his chest that meant trouble. Kara felt the hairs on her arms lift, not from cold, but from a kind of intuition that lived half a second in the future. "Tomorrow," Jade said quietly, setting her phone down like it had become something fragile. "They're going to make this bigger." The gym settled into a late-night hush that wasn't quiet so much as full of people trying to make small noises mean comfort. The push alert still glowed on a few screens like a rash. Kara traced a finger around the rim of her empty bowl and listened to the way the building breathed. Generators, rain on high windows, the low rumble of someone snoring like a truck downshifting far away. Jade flipped her phone back over, not to stream but to show a message thread. "If the city is going to put you under lights tomorrow, we put you under questions tonight," she said. "My place is 4 blocks. Big windows. No red bulbs. We can walk." Davenport pushed off the wall. "We have a safe address," he said. "Controlled access. We can bring lamps, we can." "She needs a room that doesn't look like a holding cell," Jade said, not combative, just accurate. "People need to meet her in a place without cots and cops." Miles looked at Kara. "Do you want to go?" he asked, making the wanting the point. Kara considered the ceiling, the doors, the line of volunteers still rolling towels like they were cigarettes. "I can walk," she said. "I would like to stretch." They moved as a small odd parade through damp streets. Jade with a backpack full of battery packs, Miles with a kit and a thermos someone had pressed into his hands, Davenport with the quiet alertness of a man who knew how many windows were on every block, and Kara, who tilted her face toward every unbroken patch of sky like a plant refusing to be scolded. Jade's place was a narrow second-floor apartment above a bodega that smelled like citrus and floor cleaner. A cat watched them from the window across the alley with the grave suspicion of the truly local. Inside, plants crowded the sill, a couch listed to starboard, and a wall of books tried to keep a very old radiator from winning their argument. Jade killed the overheads and dragged 2 lamps to the window so their light hit Kara from the side, a soft, honest wash. "No tricks," Jade said, setting the phone on the coffee table lens down. "I'm recording, but it's not live. If you say something you don't want out there, we cut it. If you need a break, we break." Kara sat, hands on her knees like a student waiting for roll call. The red scrape along her jaw had faded to a memory. The cuffs of Miles's extra hoodie swallowed her wrists. "Okay," she said. "Let's show them unanswered." Jade didn't start with power or planets. "What was the first thing you saw when you came up out of the river?" she asked. Kara's mouth hitched at one corner. "A boy with a backpack that had a shark on it," she said. "He was crying without sound. I know that kind of crying." "What scares you?" "Not being able to help because I didn't listen fast enough." "What makes you laugh?" "Your cat," Kara said, nodding toward the alley window. "Thinks we are plotting." Jade smiled despite the day. "If people want to give you a name, Solar Girl, Angel Girl, whatever. Do you want one?" "I already have one," Kara said simply. "Kara is enough." "Are you a weapon?" "I'm a person," Kara answered, the words steady now owned. "And I'm learning." They talked for an hour in the easy shape of conversation that survives cutting. Miles made tea that tasted like a hug and refused to be on camera. Davenport stood in the kitchen pretending to read texts and actually measuring the distance between trust and risk. When Jade finally clicked the phone dark, the room felt lighter, as if words had opened a window. "It'll help," Jade said. "Not with everyone, but with enough." Davenport's phone buzzed again, a thread from City Hall with a new attachment. A polished deck from Halcyon Dynamics with a tasteful logo and a title that tried very hard to sound boring. He skimmed. Spectral management, crowd pacification, non-lethal compliance. A diagram of a city block blushed red. A footnote grinned about private-public partnerships. His jaw tightened so slowly the muscle didn't know it was happening. He forwarded it to Naomi with one line. "Tell me everything wrong with this before noon." On the 45th floor of a building that didn't blink, Cassidy Thorne clicked a remote and warmed a conference room into deep, expensive crimson. The table made a long, glossy oval of the color. The men around it were careful not to call it blood. Behind Cassidy, a model skyline lit like a holiday. "Demonstrably," she said, "our visitors' capabilities degrade under concentrated red spectrum. We've tuned a matrix that can bathe a square mile with a precision of 2 nanometers. We offer cities a dial, not a panic button." She did not say Kara. She said environment, event, exception, insurance. She said resilience so often it stopped meaning anything and then meant only purchase order. A deputy mayor with reins still on his shoulders said something about liability. Cassidy smiled like a surgeon about to bill. "We take that off your hands," she said. "You keep the ribbon cuttings. We handle the compliance." In the back of the room, a man from a federal office adjusted his tie and did not ask what it meant to tune a person out of their own body. Outside, lake water worked at its shoreline the way time works at everything. Naomi called Davenport from her lab, and he could hear the equations in her breath. "I've been digging. If they're using LEDs with narrow peaks around 650 to 670 nanometers, they can find a very uncomfortable trough for Kara. It won't kill her. It will make her less herself. Can we counter it?" Davenport asked. "With sunlight," Naomi said, "blunt as physics. Or with broad-spectrum floods that smear their neat little peak. I'm drafting a list of every bulb the city should replace yesterday. I'm also looking at rooftops. There are 3 heliostats used for art installations we can steal for civic responsibility." "Steal? Borrow flamboyantly," Naomi said. "Keep her near windows tomorrow. Avoid the pier if they turn it red." She paused. "I know you can't cancel a concert already announced, Cole. But maybe you can make sure the power accidentally fails." He stared at the ceiling and counted 4 tiles before answering. "Do what you can do. I'll do what I can do." Back at Jade's, Kara stood and rolled her shoulders as if the air had weight she could redistribute. She drifted an inch without meaning to, corrected by touching 2 fingers to Miles's forearm, and then laughed at herself. The laugh made the cat in the alley blink and yawn. "You'll stay at the safe address tonight," Davenport said, not a threat, a promise. 2 agents outside. Daylight lamps inside. "In the morning, we bring you back here to release the interview on your terms." Kara nodded. "And the concert?" "We watch them," Jade said, fierce in a small, domestic way. "We don't let them write your story with a switch." The safe address turned out to be a 4th-floor walk-up with a south-facing window and furniture that had never been sat on by anyone who wasn't tired. Kara stood by the glass and tried out the city's reflection of her. Woman, wet hair, borrowed hoodie, jaw no longer bruised. She put her palm to the pane and let the cold kiss her lifeline. In the street below, a delivery truck coughed and a couple argued kindly under a shared umbrella, and a teenage boy practiced a skateboard trick he hadn't landed all week and landed it twice. Sleep was hard and then easy. She woke once to a red ambulance wash across the ceiling and felt the now familiar tug of wrongness in her bones. It faded as the color passed and left a chalk outline of the feeling behind. She fell under again and dreamed she was building a bridge out of mirrors. Morning was gray in a way that wanted to be kind. Naomi sent a graph with a message that read, "You get a 30-minute window today if the wind does what wind does." Jade's edit arrived with a link and a note. "Watch before we share." Kara sat cross-legged on the couch and watched a stranger on a screen talk about buses and boys and names. The cut showed hands and laughter and the way she searched for words and found them. It didn't show strength like a trick. It showed steadiness like a choice. "Do you like it?" Jade asked over speaker, voice tight in the way you hide a hope you think might be obvious. "I like that I look like me," Kara said. "Share it." The video slid into the morning like a note under a door. It moved faster than coffee does, slower than rumor. Comments multiplied. Some bit, some blessed. A mother wrote that her son slept through the night for the first time since the storm. A man wrote that he didn't believe in angels but he believed in women lifting buses. A bot wrote nonsense and was ignored. On a sidewalk near City Hall, Davenport walked with the mayor, who had ditched heels for boots and patience for pointed questions. "Do I cancel the pier?" she asked without preface. "You'll get crucified for it," Davenport said. "And they'll do it later with less warning." "And if I let it happen?" "We make it safer than they planned," he said. "We add our own lights." He hesitated. "We keep her away from the worst of it if we can." The mayor stared at a lamppost as if it had applied for a permit. "I didn't run for office to manage a person like a traffic signal," she said. "But I did run to keep people from getting hurt. Do the second thing. Then find the first thing a better verb." By noon, the city had tidied itself just enough to aim at celebration. Food trucks lined up like cheerful soldiers. A stage rose with alarming efficiency. Families came because they needed to stand near other families. Halcyon's crew unloaded cases marked with innocuous strings of numbers that only Naomi would have read as wavelengths. On rooftops 3 blocks away, a trio of mirrors waited for commands written by artists and about to be stolen by necessity. Kara ate a bagel like it was a complicated machine she was determined to understand. Miles showed her how to put on a baseball cap so her hair didn't try to leave her head. Jade taped a lav mic to the inside of Kara's collar and then took it off again because the sound of Kara's laugh didn't need help. They were halfway down the stairs when a text from Naomi landed in all their pockets at once. "Heads up. Crew installing red panels along pier. Angles suggest full wash." Kara paused on the landing and looked at the slice of day outside. Gray, but with relief at the edges. She could feel the weight of the choice weighting down by the water, the balance between being visible and being used. She closed her eyes and pictured the boy with the shark backpack and the toddler with the crackers and the woman who had said thank you like it was a gift she wasn't sure she could afford. "We go," she said, opening her eyes. "We don't let them decide what red means." Navy Pier smelled like rain on old wood and sugar from a dozen food trucks trying to bribe the weather. The lake was still chewing on itself, but the wind had backed off, and families had brought their softest smiles, the ones they saved for graduations and last days of chemo. A band sound-checked with the scrappy optimism of people who believed in chords as infrastructure. Overhead, cranes lifted trusses into place, and the crew in black loped around like stagehands and soldiers both. Near the end of the pier, a row of unfamiliar casings had been bolted to light poles at chest height. Sleek, matte, anonymous in the way expensive things try to be. Naomi's voice came thin over speaker. Half breath, half caution. "They're not city issue. Their housings are vented. Active cooling. That's overkill for white floods. Watch for the color shift." Kara kept moving, hands shoved into the pocket of the borrowed hoodie, baseball cap pulled low in a way that fooled no one in a radius of 20 feet. Children saw her and forgot their shy. Hope has a way of recognizing itself. Adults saw her and remembered their posture. She smiled at both, and something in the air calmed that wasn't the weather. Davenport peeled off toward a control tent where a laminated map was taped crooked to a table. "I want to see your power plan," he told a man in a headset who looked like he'd drawn the short straw labeled "Talk to Authority." The man gestured to a contractor from Halcyon, who gestured to a black case that had its own badge. The contractor said things like redundant feeds and safety cascade and didn't say proprietary. Davenport didn't touch the case. He noted where the mains came up from the pier and where the emergency cutoffs hid under neat plastic flaps. He smiled the way professionals smile right before they ruin your afternoon by being right. Jade walked the edge of the crowd, lens pointed down at shoelaces and hands holding paper boats of fries, letting audio tell most of the story. We're here because the city is trying to knit itself back together with music and stew and borrowed generators, she narrated, a reporter and a neighbor in one. We're here because the worst thing that happened this week isn't the only thing that happened. Miles hoisted a med bag onto a folding table near the stage where a red cross had been duct-taped like a conscience. He sorted gauze, tape, saline, the small objects that keep disaster from deciding the final word belongs to it. He kept glancing up at Kara the way you check a patient's breathing after you've already checked it, not because you don't trust your first read, but because you need to trust it again. The mayor stepped to a mic with rain in her hair and a grin that dared the clouds to try something. Her "we're glad you're here" didn't feel scripted, and that was its own kind of script. When the band started, people forgot about their shoes for 3 minutes at a time. The color change arrived like someone had dimmed the afternoon and angled it slightly mean. It wasn't instant, and that made it worse. The casings on the poles warmed from the inside, a low mechanical purr sliding into the bones of the pier. White light leaned toward amber, then deeper, sliding past theatrical warmth into a color that wasn't sunset so much as warning. The crowd didn't notice at first. Phones compensated. The second verse sounded different against a red that didn't come from the sky. Kara felt it as a tug in the meat of her. The air became heavy and familiar in the way of a bad memory. She touched the brim of her cap like it was a talisman, then took it off and handed it to a child who'd been staring. "Hold that for me," she said, and the boy nodded solemnly, task accepted with the gravity of kings. "Color shift," Naomi said in their ears, voice suddenly all edges. 650 to 670, narrow and bright. "They're tuning for you." Jade's camera caught the way the red slipped under cheekbones and turned smiles into something more fragile. She lifted her phone toward one of the new fixtures and zoomed. A lattice of tiny emitters glowed like a field of coals. "Halcyon," she whispered, the word braided from fact and fury. Miles looked at Kara and saw the way her shoulders pulled in like a runner who has realized the hill is longer than the map said. "Talk to me," he said, stepping close enough that his voice didn't have to compete with the band. "Where are you?" "Like swimming in a coat," she said, humor asplint. "I can still be me. It's just harder." On stage, the guitarist glanced up, played through his mistake, and shot a look at the lightboard that read in any language. "What are you doing?" The Halcyon tech in the control tent watched a tablet graph kiss a target line and smiled with professional satisfaction. Cassidy Thorne, halfway down the pier in a coat that made the rain an accessory, watched the crowd the way a chef watches a soufflé, not hoping to see it collapse exactly, but prepared. Davenport moved. He didn't sprint. He didn't bark. He simply covered ground with the kind of decision that makes lesser decisions get out of the way. In the control tent, he flipped the laminate map aside and put a hand on the black case. "Kill the supplemental spectrum," he said, calm enough to be heard as a plan, not a threat. "Sir, we're mid-demo," the contractor protested, fingers already sliding to cover a control he didn't want noticed. "This is signed off. City approved." "The city approved emergency lighting," Davenport said. "This isn't that." He looked at the emergency cutoff under its polite plastic cover and then at the contractor. "You touch me and I swear I will bury you in paperwork so deep you come out in China," he said pleasantly, and broke the seal on the cutoff. Kara didn't wait to see if it worked. People at the rear of the crowd had started to press forward, a tide with no ill will and no brakes. Panic is contagious. So is steadiness. She rose a foot, wobbled, rose another, found the slant of pressure like a current and leaned against it. Hovering above the packed bodies, she lifted both hands in a gesture as old as choirs. The noise dropped a notch without anyone deciding to lower it. "We're okay," she called. No amplification, but the shape of the sentence made other people want to repeat it. "We're okay." The cutoff thunked. Nothing changed. Whoever designed the system had isolated the showpiece from the safety line. Davenport swore without volume, pivoted, and ripped open the black case with an economy of motion that could have been called vandalism if it weren't so clearly medicine. Inside were racks of drivers and a board with 3 fat cables labeled with numbers that were angry and precise. He pulled one. The red light hiccuped, wavered, returned, thinner. He pulled the second. The spectrum narrowed, cutting deeper. The third cable was zip-tied like a promise. He yanked. Plastic bit his palm. He didn't care. He tore it free. The red died in a lurch. The world snapped flatter and kinder. The band missed a beat, then remembered itself. Someone in the middle of the crowd started clapping. Relief spilled into rhythm, and the clapping became dancing because bodies will choose joy when you take your knee off their windpipe. Kara sagged midair, then caught herself, a smile breaking over her face not because she had done it, but because someone else had. She drifted down near the med table and set her bare feet on wet boards that felt briefly like ground again. Miles was already there with a bottle of water because being useful is a habit. She drank, the way you drink after a race you didn't know you'd entered. Jade had followed Davenport into the tent and filmed everything except faces. Hands on cables, the flicker, the neat labels, the sticker with the tiny halcyon brand where only a lawsuit would look. On the record, she said, not accusing, almost grateful. You cut it. I cut it, Davenport said, and then, because truth is better when you fall on it yourself, and they'll turn it back on in 2 minutes unless I find the mains. He leaned past her to the back wall where the feeds came up from the pier and flipped a bank of breakers. The tent sighed as electronics powered down. Outside, the light returned to normal, which is to say imperfect and human and fine. Cassidy came walking through the near-quiet like a weather system with excellent hair and found Davenport with his hand still on the breaker. That was unhelpful, she said, her voice smooth as an invoice. That was necessary, he replied. If you want to test your toys, do it in a lab, not on a crowd. It's not a toy, she said. It is a control mechanism to keep people safe. From whom? Jade asked before Davenport could, stepping into the little circle of grown-up conversation on behalf of everyone who'd been glowing red a minute ago. From a woman who lifted a bus? Cassidy's smile didn't change. From whatever comes next, she said. You have no idea what that will be. Maybe not, Jade said. But I know what this was. She panned her phone to the side so the lens caught the casings cooling on the poles, the stagehands frowning, the band tuning back to something like joy. It was a company trying to write the city's feeling with a dial. Kara took a step back toward the crowd as a child approached, his little arm up like he was hailing a cab, the baseball cap still clutched in his fist. You told me to hold it, he said, proud of his success. I did. You did great, Kara said, kneeling so the two of them made their own calm. She set the cap back on the boy's head. You look better in it. A woman reached for Kara's hand. Not a grab. A question. Kara gave it, squeezed once, and let go. The crowd edged wider without pressure, granting her space the way you do for musicians who have just nailed a difficult run. Above them, the clouds thinned in torn strips. A pale coin of sun poked through briefly, an apology, a promise. Naomi whooshed in their ears, relief doing wheelies. I could kiss whoever pulled those breakers, she said. Please tell me the city owns them now. I own them for the next 10 minutes, Davenport said, not joking, eyes scanning for the next attempt, the next casing, the next idea shaped like a threat. Cassidy drifted away like rain, deciding it had better things to do. She took a call without looking at the number and said, No, not a failure. A calibration. Kara breathed, and the air belonged to her again. The band found a groove that made feet commit to being feet and not hoofbeats. The mayor came back to the mic and, bless her, didn't pretend nothing had happened. We got too clever for a second, she said, steady as a kitchen table. We are unclevering. We're going to stick to the light the sky gives us and the light we give each other. Now, where were we? Oh, right, singing. Later, after the last song and before the last trash bag, after Davenport had filed 3 reports and pre-written 6 apologies he hoped he wouldn't need, after Jade had uploaded a cut that showed cables and cutoffs and a city deciding that red wasn't a good enough reason to be afraid, after Miles had traded a pack of gauze for a story about a grandmother who'd danced barefoot at her own wedding and decided to do it again, Kara sat on the edge of the pier with her shoes off and her toes numb. From Lake Air. The surface ruckused with small waves, and somewhere under the planks a gull complained about the service. She felt tired in the honest way, a usefulness kind of tired, not the red kind. The wrongness ghosted along the edge of her memory but didn't sink hooks. She closed her eyes and listened to the pier creak, the city breathe, the soft chatter of people who had chosen to stay a little longer in the not danger. Miles dropped down beside her, boots thudding wood, and handed her a paper cup of something that pretended to be cocoa and lost the argument in a charming way. "Not how I thought a concert would go," he said. "I liked the bridge better," she said, then amended. "I liked the people on the bridge better. The bridge itself was rude." He laughed, tired then sobered. "They're going to keep trying to build things around you." "I know," she said. "We'll keep unbuilding." Jade sat on her other side, phone dark, for once content to let a moment be a moment without turning it into a package. "Naomi says there's a break in the clouds tomorrow at 12:47, she said. "She has a plan that uses art to fight a spreadsheet." Kara smiled at the water. "Good," she murmured. "I want to win with mirrors." Naomi's lab looked like a storm had decided to try out being math for a night. Whiteboards leaned against tables like tired soldiers, their surfaces packed with curves and numbers, arrows stabbing at boxes labeled with words that needed more sleep. She'd taped printouts to cupboard doors and written on the tape when she ran out of door. A small fan tricked the air into thinking it could be fresh. When the four of them filed in, she didn't look up right away. She was in that humming place where ideas connect like magnets. "I hate their spectrum," she said by way of hello. "It's clever in the way a bear trap is clever. Sit." Kara perched on a stool and swallowed a hiss as her muscles finally admitted they were tired. Miles found her a glass of water without being asked. Jade put her phone on the counter face down in a place where it could hear but not interrupt. Davenport stood by the door and became the shape doors make when they decide to be useful. Naomi clicked a remote, and a slide of the sky appeared on a portable screen, gray layered over gray like a stack of blank paper. Lines traced across it like flight paths. "Cloud deck's messy, but the models think we get a decent break tomorrow at 12:47. 10 minutes, plus or minus 5, if wind speed stays within the band. Not enough to throw a parade. Enough to throw a wrench." Kara watched the curve of sunlight's energy crawl across the graph. It felt like looking at a recipe for herself. "Can we use it?" "With mirrors," Naomi said, finally smiling like a card trick had worked. "There are 3 heliostats in a downtown art installation that usually paint light murals onto a building across the river. I can remote into 2. The third will need hands. If we tilt them toward Soldier Field, our window multiplies." Jade straightened. "I can climb," she said. "Give me the one with the worst ladder." Miles raised a hand. "I'll take the jammed actuator. Worst case, I bring a wrench and bad manners." Davenport's phone buzzed. He didn't pull it out. "How illegal is this?" he asked, which in his language meant, "I'm already in." "Borrowing for public good," Naomi said. "At worst, we leave a thank you note and a grant application. The real problem is the thing they're going to do at the stadium. They'll frame it as a resilience showcase, emergency lighting for future disasters. You'll be part of the invite whether you RSVP or not." She glanced up at Kara. "They want to prove they can dim you." Kara looked at her hands, palms nicked from cable and railing, skin already unmarked. "They can make me weaker," she said, "but they can't decide what I am." Naomi dug in a drawer and produced a shoebox lined with foam. Inside lay a small lamphead studded with diodes. She flicked it on, and a slice of red cut the counter in 2. Kara felt the wrongness skim the bones of her forearms like cold. Naomi tilted the lamp away. The sensation drained. "I needed to know," Naomi said, voice gone careful. "I'm sorry. We have to understand how quickly it acts and how quickly you recover." "Do it again," Kara said. 1 second. 3. 5. They did it in small pulses, and Miles kept time with a medic's ruthless kindness, and Naomi took notes like the world's kindest interrogator. It was not torture. It was precise testing in a room that loved her. Still, when Naomi finally clicked the device dark and closed the box, everyone exhaled as if a held breath had been returned. "Recovery is fast under neutral or warm daylight," Naomi said, eyes on the numbers and something like regret on the line of her mouth. "Slow in red. Plateau under cool fluorescence. The mirrors matter. So does staying off the pier's front row." Jade reached across the counter and set her hand on Kara's. grounding the theory the way a hand on a shoulder makes a room feel less like a lab. You don't have to go near their demo at all, she said, knowing even as she said it that it wasn't how the day would go. Kara's laugh was softer than the one she gave the cameras. If I don't show up, she said, they'll write me as a threat in absentia. If I do, they'll try to write me as a switch. I would rather write myself. Davenport finally looked at his phone. Messages stacked like bricks. City Hall, federal acronyms, 2 reporters who knew his daughter's names and thought that was a ticket. One subject line from Halcyon's counsel read, "Partnership opportunities. Immediate." He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the case and said to no one in particular, "Tomorrow I'll inspect the backup generators. Sometimes things fail when you look at them wrong." Naomi pointed a marker at him. "If you can get the stadium to run on white floods with a broad spread and keep those casings off the rails, you'll buy us time. Even a minute helps." On a screen in a different room of the city, Cassidy Thorne practiced the language of inevitability. With a stylist pinning a stray curl and a comms director offering synonyms, she recorded a statement about safety tools and controlled environments and how the city was leading the nation in forward-thinking resilience. There was no red in her studio. The light was perfect, flattering and honest, and neither thing at once. "People are scared," she told a partner over a call afterward. "Fear is a budget we can balance. We'll isolate the Spectrum drivers from the breaker this time. Redundancies on the redundancies. If it fails quietly." She smiled at the window's reflection until her smile looked like hers again. Back in the lab, the fatigue arrived for Kara the way waves do after you've gotten out of the water. Late, insistent, uninterested in your plans. She slid off the stool and walked to the window where Naomi had leaned a mirror to steal a strip of dull morning from a streetlight. The borrowed daylight found her like a familiar dog nosing a knee. She didn't get stronger. She just stopped getting weaker, and that felt like a kind of strength. Miles touched the scrape on his own knuckles as if seeing blood kept superstition away. "We should eat," he said, the plain command of a man who has watched too many people forget. "Food tastes like luck after nights like this." They found noodles and ate them out of cartons while Naomi built a spreadsheet that looked like a prayer disguised as logistics. She assigned rooftops. She sent access codes. She texted a grad student to borrow bolt cutters and got back 3 flame emojis and the word professor? With 6 question marks. Jade set alarms on her phone for every brownout in the neighborhood and labeled them with jokes so that panic would have to get past humor to arrive. Davenport typed a memo about testing protocols that used the word reevaluate with weaponized politeness and attached specs he was not yet supposed to have. When the food was gone and the plan was as good as a plan gets at 1:23 in the morning, Naomi rolled her chair back and scrubbed her face with both hands. "I don't know if what we're doing is big or small," she said. "But it feels correct. It feels like not letting someone else define tomorrow," Jade said. "That's big enough." Kara stood, or at least she meant to. She found herself hovering an inch above the floor. No effort, no performance. Just a body refusing to obey a rule it hadn't agreed to write. She looked down at her toes, spread them, laughed quietly, and let herself settle. "I keep forgetting," she said, almost sheepish. "That's okay," Miles said. "We'll remind you." The safe address had acquired new lamps overnight, the kind that imitate the sun without pretending to be it. Davenport walked them there in a silence that was more companion than gap and stationed his agents again with the look of a man building a fence where he knew the wolves were also people with clipboards. At the door, he hesitated, then said, "If anything feels wrong, you call me first. Not the mayor. Not the press. Me." Kara nodded. "Will you sleep?" He made a face. "Define sleep." She opened the window, even though the air was damp and tasted like pennies, and leaned out. The city at 2 in the morning is a different species than the one at 2 in the afternoon. Less certain of its own loudness. More honest about its cracks. Somewhere a train crossed a bridge and played a chord against the rails. Somewhere a couple laughed low, the postscript of an argument that had chosen not to be a prelude. Somewhere a server wiped down a counter and flipped a sign to open because the world keeps starting even when you're not ready. Jade curled up with her laptop and made a new cut of the interview, a version where the pauses were allowed to be long. Comments began to pool as the video moved through the city's veins. Some were ugly in the predictable ways. Most were not. A nurse on the night shift watched between rounds and wrote, "You made my patient smile for the first time since her house flooded." A teenager wrote, "How do I help?" The answer wasn't a link. It was 10 small suggestions and a joke about bringing extra socks. It was a new thread on the neighborhood forum that didn't devolve into a fight by the third reply. Kara finally slept and dreamed that she was teaching a class of kindergartners how to build heliostats out of construction paper. And every time the paper mirrored the sun, the classroom filled with birds. When she woke, the light had turned that particular color the city gets before it decides to be morning. She stretched, not because she needed to, but because it felt right. Her phone buzzed. Naomi again. 3 words. Wind still favors. They met back at the lab with coffee so bad it circled around to charming. Naomi handed out small walkie-talkies because cell towers love to fail exactly when you need them to hold the line. She drew a map on the back of a takeout menu and circled 3 rooftops with a flourish like a magician choosing volunteers. A, B, C, she said. I'm at A. Jade at B. Miles at C. Kara, you own the sky. Cole, you own the plugs. Davenport checked his watch and then, for once, put it in his pocket like a gesture against the tyranny of seconds. We do this clean and we do it fast, he said. We get in, we tilt art, we get out. At the stadium, we avoid anything with a matte black casing and a smug engineer attached. Kara touched the graph one last time, the line that said 1247 with such confidence it made her want to protect it. We're going to win with mirrors, she said again, like a wish she had decided was a plan. Then she pulled her cap down, even though it didn't disguise anyone from anything, and stepped into the corridor with the stride of someone who knows that fear is a thing you carry, not a thing you obey. The stadium had the soft roar of a beehive that had decided to be friendly. Families wore borrowed team gear and disaster week hoodies that would live in drawers for years. Volunteers handed out water with a pageantry that made plastic bottles feel ceremonial. Vendors learned how to smile with their whole faces again. On the field, techs in black coiled cables like punctuation. The sky kept its poker face, a thick shuffle of cloud with a pale promise running along the southern edge. Davenport walked the concourse with a clipboard he didn't need and authority he did. He checked the generator housings, the breaker panels. The tidy panels marked emergency use only. He spoke softly to electricians who had forearms like rope and paid attention when a man in a suit didn't waste their time. White floods only, he said. No color gel, no narrow peaks. If a contractor tries to plug a black case into your line, you call me, you unplug it, and you go get a hot dog on my tab. Naomi's voice crackled over the little walkie clipped to his shoulder. Heliostat A online, she said, breathless and pleased. If the clouds cooperate, I can paint a patch of the 50-yard line bright enough to make a catnap. Jade answered from a rooftop with wind singing in the mic. B is tall, she said. The ladder hates me. We're negotiating. Miles came in steady and calm. C's actuator is rusted to hell, but it's moving. Slowly. I brought a wrench that thinks it's from a cartoon. Kara hovered high enough to be a rumor, low enough to help if gravity did anything rude. She wore the borrowed cap for the walk-in and then handed it to a girl with a braid and a serious face. The girl nodded once like she'd been entrusted with a relic. Kara smiled and felt the city smile back in the clumsy, earnest way of people trying bravery on like a coat that might finally fit. Cassidy Thorne arrived in a coat the exact color a cloud thinks of itself in the mirror, and walked the sideline with a handler and a shadow that didn't belong to the weather. She shook the mayor's hand as if it were both inevitable and optional. Thank you for partnering with us, she said to the mic that was not on and to the cameras that were somewhere. Safety is a system. Her eyes found Davenport across the field, the way magnets find each other when someone finally stops pretending to hold them apart. She tilted her head a quarter inch, a compliment or a challenge depending on the day you'd had. At 12:31 the light changed. It didn't fall. It shifted, the way a song shifts key by one note so your throat knows before your brain does. Along the rail, sleek fixtures that had not been there yesterday glowed from within, their fans whispering. The field leaned toward amber, then into a red that had no business at a daytime concert. Phones made it look normal because that's what phones do. Human eyes did not. A hush moved through the bowl, thin and quick, like a rumor about a rumor. Kara felt it in the marrow, not as pain exactly, but as subtraction. The red asked parts of her to wait outside. She dropped 6 feet, caught herself, rose 4, refused to do math with her own body as the numbers got cruel. On the walkie, Naomi's tone flattened into science. 658 nanometers with a tight peak. They tuned it tighter. Kara, stay high and out of the densest wash until we get mirrors. Davenport reached the nearest control bay and found a black case with a discreet logo and a lock that wanted to be flattered. He wasn't in the mood. City equipment only, he told the halcyon tech standing guard. Signed off, the man said a little too quickly. Safety supplement. We did that song yesterday, Davenport said, and cut the feed to his section. The red thinned on a wedge of the stands. 3 sections down, it deepened, compensating. Redundancies on redundancies. He looked up and saw Cassidy glance at a tablet and smile without teeth. On rooftop A, Naomi snapped a harness to a line and leaned into the wind like a woman arguing with weather and winning on points. The heliostat's polished surface caught broken daylight and flung a pale smear onto the stadium's far edge. She adjusted, swore gently at a motor that insisted it was tired, and got another percentage point of aim. A is tracking, she reported. Waiting on a hole in the clouds. I need 8 degrees more sun than we have. On rooftop B, Jade climbed the last rungs with the caution of someone who had promised 3 people she would not be a story today. The maintenance ladder shook disapproval into her arms. She told it a joke about being born for this and then didn't look down. The heliostat's control panel was tucked in a metal box that had been designed by a person who hated fingers. She opened it with a quarter and a sigh. B is online, she said, a little breathless. It's sticky, but it listens if you're nice. On rooftop C, Miles discovered that rust is a personality trait. The actuator had welded itself to the idea of never moving again. He set the strap wrench, leaned, felt it slip, set it again. He muttered encouragement like he would to a stubborn trachea. C is pretending, he said into the walkie. Not wasting anyone's time with false optimism. Give me 2 minutes and a miracle. Kara drifted lower, holding herself inside a corridor of thinner red she could feel more than see, the way a swimmer finds the current that does not hate them. A chant started somewhere too far away to be strategic. We're okay, we're okay, we're okay. It wasn't loud. It was enough to make other voices choose to match it instead of panic. The mayor stepped to the mic and didn't try to sell the moment as anything other than what it was. We're adjusting, she told the field, as if talking to a recalcitrant recipe. Hang tight. If you feel crowded, take 3 steps back and breathe. If the person next to you looks small, make space larger than you think they need. She didn't look toward Cassidy. She didn't have to. Naomi's voice jumped a half octave. Window forming in 2, she said. Thin break along the south. If we tilt in sequence, a then B then C, we can punch a beam through the wash and spread it across the field. She sounded like a conductor calling cues in a storm. Cole, flood the ring with whites on my mark. Smear their spectrum. Copy, Davenport said, already waving at the electricians, already pointing at the banks he wanted hot, already ignoring the halcyon tech putting a phone to his ear as if a call could undo the decision now that it was a decision. Cassidy watched with the composure of someone who had rehearsed a dozen contingencies and accepted the need to display none. We'll log this as a stress test, she murmured to her handler. Note the municipal intervention. Scale redundancy in next deployment. Add legal. The red pressed in harder. Kara's hands trembled. She stilled them by making her fingers do very deliberate things. Count, flex, circle. A boy in the front row held up her cap like a flag. She smiled at him and got a smile back that reminded her why she was spending herself in inches. A is ready, Naomi said. Give me the hole and I'll throw the sun. Jade braced her knees against the heliostat's housing and coaxed the control 2 notches with a patience that would have surprised anyone who knew her only from her streams. B is lined, she said. Down on the pier yesterday she had filmed cables and a hand on a breaker. Today she filmed a square of sky. Miles set the strap wrench again. His palms burned under the rubber. He leaned. felt a groan in the metal that could be hope or a taunt. "Come on," he told it like you talk to the living. "You've done harder things than this." In his ear, Kara said his name, and the way she said it was a rope. "Kara," Naomi said softly on the net, "because sometimes science needs to look someone in the eyes. We're close. Keep your altitude if you can." "I'm here," Kara said, and it was both a location and a promise. The clouds seemed brightened. Not much. Enough. A blade of white cut the south edge of the stadium like someone had flicked open a pocket knife. Naomi moved first. Heliostat A turned with a small, triumphant whine, caught the slice, and sent it skimming across rooftops like a thrown plate. It landed on the upper deck and spilled into the bowl, startling in its plainness. "Now B," Naomi said. Jade adjusted in 2 jerks and a breath, and the second mirror found the first's edge and pushed it closer to the field. The light joined the other light and behaved like a better idea joining a good one. The sum looked different than the parts. "See," Naomi said, and she didn't say please because there wasn't time and because Miles already knew. He leaned until the strap cut into his palm and the housing creaked and the actuator made the small animal noise of something considering change. It held. He reset. He put his weight into it not all at once but in a slow, persuasive arc, the way you talk someone off a ledge by reminding them about small good things. The wrench slipped. His knuckles cracked against steel. He tasted copper and swallowed a swear because he refused to spend air on anything but the work. "It stuck," he said, honest and hating the word. Kara dropped 2 feet, caught herself with a sick little coast, and spoke into his ear like they were back on the bridge, like the day had not layered itself with complications since. "Remember the backboard," she said. "Lift with your legs, not your back. Turn from your hips. Breathe on the push." He laughed once, a surprise that shook out of a tired body. "Copy," he said, and planted his feet and did what she said. Not because physics had changed, but because sometimes instructions carry the person who gives them. Down on the field, the red deepened again in a mean little surge, as if offended by the geometry of resistance. People shifted, murmurs rose. A baby cried the kind of cry that makes adults flinch. Davenport pointed, and the electricians threw the white floods to full. Broad-spectrum glare poured down, ugly and flat and perfect, smearing the knife-edge red into something less surgical. 2 minutes, Naomi said. Maybe less. Miles set the wrench. He inhaled, counted without hurry. Kara heard him through the static of the day, through the red, through fear's cheap tricks. She found the exact center of herself where light still pooled, small but real, and held it up for him like a lantern you carry because it matters who can see. "On 3, he said, and the word didn't feel like a countdown to a thing that might fail. It felt like the beginning of a promise. 3, Miles said, and turned from his hips, legs doing the work, breath timed to the strain. The actuator groaned like a stubborn door and then, with a small, decisive pop that he felt more than heard, it moved. The mirror swung a few degrees, just enough to catch the knife of sun that had slipped through the clouds. Light leapt. Heliostats see through its beam into the path of B, which was already kissing the edge of A's reflection. The 3 blades met over the field and spread, not blinding, just honest. White gold poured into the bowl, washing the red into corners, thinning it until it stopped being a command and went back to being a color. Kara felt it hit her skin like a breath she'd been holding for days. The shrugging weakness unclenched. The ache left her bones as if someone had apologized and meant it. She rose without wobble, higher now, to where the red was weakest and the pooled gold was strongest, and the stadium tilted toward quiet in the way a crowd does when it agrees, without words, to watch something happen. Cassidy's handler hissed into her ear. "They're flooding. Mirrors. 3 sources. We can." "No," Cassidy said softly, eyes on the changing light. She wasn't rattled. She was taking notes. "Watch where the field thins. We'll learn more now than we would have with another minute of red." Davenport pointed, and the electricians blasted the broad white floods to full, smearing the last narrow peaks into a flat daylight that didn't care about nanometers. Halcyon techs scrambled to reroute within the system they'd so cleverly isolated from the cutoffs, but the geometry had changed. The stadium had decided to be a sun trap and there wasn't a red strong enough to argue. Jade laughed into the wind on the rooftop. the kind of laugh that arrives after fear has failed to do its worst. "You're good," she said into the net, not asking. Naomi answered with a triumphant, "A holds. Be as steady. See, you beautiful mule, don't you dare move." Miles wiped his bleeding knuckles on his jeans and leaned his weight into the housing to keep it honest. "Staying put," he said, proud of a machine like it was a friend. Kara aimed for the nearest matte black casing along the lower rail. She didn't smash it to prove a point. She unlatched a panel, found the cable bundle feeding the driver, and fed it to the sky, a handful at a time, ripping and tossing with brisk efficiency, a mechanic in a hurry. The casing hiccuped, died, took 2 of its neighbors with it. She moved to the next, and the next, hands finding latches the way a violinist finds notes after a long silence. Security moved the way security moves when their bosses are expensive. Quickly and toward the wrong thing. Davenport and his agents stepped into their paths without touching them, redirecting with phrases that sounded bureaucratic and were actually kind. "We have a safety protocol," he said to a supervisor trying to push past him. "It is, in effect. You can help by doing nothing for 60 seconds. A chant built in the stands, not loud, not clever, just steady. "We're okay. We're okay." The boy with Kara's cap held it up with both hands, arms trembling, face fierce with the serious work of hope. Kara dropped, touched the bill of the hat as she passed, and the boy's knees unlocked in relief. One last case remained, bolted to the rail behind the stage like a smug thought. Kara set her feet on the narrow catwalk, gripped the panel, and tore it back. The driver array blinked at her like a computer surprised to be seen. She smiled at it, no malice, just victory, and pulled the heart out. The fans spun down. The red lamps across the field stuttered and surrendered. The stadium took a breath you could feel in the soles of your feet. Music found itself again, a guitar line climbing back to the note it had been hunting before science interrupted. The mayor stepped to the mic and didn't try to own the moment. She handed it away. "Chicago," she said. "I think someone else should talk." Kara hovered at the 50-yard line. No mic. No fanfare. The mirror light laid itself over her like noon. Her voice didn't boom, it carried. "I won't be your ruler," she said. The words were plain and heavy. The way a door is heavy when it matters. "I won't be your weapon. I'll be here when you need me. I'm strongest when we are in the light, so let's give that to each other." Silence landed, respectful and real. It held just long enough for the sentence to find a place in 1,000 heads and then 1,000 more on screens. Then the sound came, not a stadium roar but something human-sized and precise, a warm applause that felt like a handshake. Strangers turned to each other and smiled in a way that wasn't about her at all. It was about deciding to be a city again. Jade lowered her phone for the first time and just watched, committing the edges of the moment to a part of herself no upload could keep. On rooftop A, Naomi leaned her forehead against the heliostat housing and cried once. Quick, the way scientists do when the math and the world agree. On rooftop C, Miles laughed, exhausted, and let the wrench go slack in his hand. Davenport looked up at Kara and, without meaning to, let pride show on his face where anyone could see it. Cassidy slipped her sunglasses on even though the sun was only a coin. "We'll debrief," she told the handler, voice low, already spinning losses into lessons. "Publicly, we celebrate resilience. Privately, we revise the drivers. This is a long game." But when she turned to leave, she glanced back at the field, at the mirrors catching a fickle sky and making it choose generosity, and her mouth tightened in a way that admitted the score. Kara sat down near the boy with the cap, level with him again, careful not to be too tall for a second that belonged to both of them. "Thank you," she said. "You held the job." He nodded, solemn and glowing. "You did yours," he answered, and it felt like being knighted by a small and excellent king. The band played something joyful and a little sloppy, the kind of song you can dance to in wet shoes. People did. They danced badly and together. Volunteers handed out popsicles from a cooler as if the world had invented them this morning. A woman in a nurse's scrub top took off her ID lanyard and let a toddler wear it as jewelry. A man who had been scowling at everything since Tuesday realized his jaw didn't have to live like that and unclenched. Above, the mirror beams thinned as the clouds closed, like a curtain drawn gently after the final line. The white floods dimmed from emergency glare to ordinary daylight. Naomi's voice came on the net, light again. Sun window closing. A, B, and C returning to Art. Good work, team. Copy, Jade said, laughter in the word. Returning B to not get me arrested mode. C survived, Miles reported. I'll send the actuator a thank you card. Davenport exhaled, the long kind that resets a ribcage. He shook the electrician's hands, put his signature on a maintenance log he'd absolutely had no reason to touch, and then walked to the control tent where he had ripped out cables yesterday and found a city tech already there, installing locks that looked unfriendly to private ingenuity. They nodded at each other, a quiet pact. Kara took a slow lap at shoulder height, not for show but to see. She saw an old couple who had chosen to stand the whole time rather than sit. Stubborn, sweet. She saw a teen with a new haircut being brave about being seen. She saw a woman with a scar she didn't hide and a laugh that said the scar had lost. She saw the mayor with her shoes in her hand, toes on the grass, talking to a line of people one at a time like a person who remembered why she'd taken the job. She landed by the med table. Miles was cleaning his knuckles with saline, face tilted up to the sliver of sky like he could charge off it if he tried hard enough. Nice speech, he said. I meant it to be a promise more than a speech, she said. Good, he said. Promises you keep with small things are my favorite kind. Jade jogged up, hair a mess of victory and wind, eyes bright. I got the beam meeting the beam meeting the beam, she said, waving her phone. Also, you tearing out a driver like you were unplugging a toaster. And Cole mid-hero mode at the breaker bank. And the boy with your hat. Don't worry. I blurred faces where it matters. Davenport joined them a beat later, finally allowing himself the drink of water he'd refused every time someone offered. There'll be fallout, he said simply. Hearings. Statements. Requests for proposals. He made a face at the phrase. But for the next 24 hours, we're going to let this win be a win. Kara looked at the crowd and let herself memorize the small things. A dog in a raincoat, a puddle with a rainbow skin, a volunteer tying a stranger's shoe. For the next 24 hours, she agreed. We'll practice the light. The mirrors bled back into the city's regular brightness, their edges softening as clouds stitched shut. People began to drift, slow and sated, the way you do after good soup. Cleanup crews appeared like friendly ghosts. The stagehands coiled cables that had done bad work today and would do good work tomorrow if someone asked them differently. Up on rooftop A, Naomi packed her harness with the particular care of a person who knows what saved her and wants to say thank you with neat coils. On B, Jade took one last shot of the skyline, caught the way the lake threw light back at the buildings, and typed a caption that was more invitation than victory lap. On C, Miles wrapped the strap wrench in a rag and tucked it into his bag like a talisman. Kara floated to the stadium rim and looked out at a city still damp and still standing. Somewhere out there, meetings were being scheduled with words like oversight and deployment and review. Somewhere else, a neighborhood message board was trading tips on where to get free laundry done if your basement had flooded. Both were the city. Both would need her. A small hand touched her elbow. The boy with the cap had come to say goodbye like a gentleman. Are you going to keep coming back? He asked. Yes, she said. When you need me. What if we don't know we need you? You'll still have each other, she said. That's the trick. He considered this, nodded once like a man concluding a deal, and ran back to his family, who had popsicles and an opinion about the best route to the train. Kara rose, just a little, and let the last of the warm light soak in. The red wasn't gone from the world. It wouldn't be. But it had been told where it could and couldn't go. That would have to be enough for today. Tomorrow would ask for more. Tomorrow did. It began with a spreadsheet and the smell of bleach in a borrowed council chamber. Microphones lined up like little mouths waiting to be fed. Cassidy Thorne sat 3 seats in from the center, hair perfect, words polished, calling what happened a spectral stress test and commending the city for its nimble response. She didn't say red. She said resilience and partnership until the syllables sanded down their own edges. Davenport wore the same suit he had worn yesterday and the look of a man who had slept in a chair and woken up less tired than he deserved. When his turn came, he didn't perform. He described what he saw: fixtures that weren't on the city spec, drivers isolated from safety cutoffs, a crowd turning smaller under a color that had no business being that strong. He didn't say Kara's name. He said people. He said risk. He said stop. Jade's cut of the pier and the stadium went live a half hour before lunch. 2 minutes long and stubbornly calm. It showed hands on cables, faces blurred, mirrors turning, the boy with the cap lifted like a flag. It did not show panic. It showed math and choice and the moment a city decided not to be impressed by a trick. By the afternoon session, staffers were watching it on their phones just out of frame and pretending their questions had not been influenced by a video with 30,000 comments and one pinned line. We don't have to scare each other to keep each other safe. Naomi presented last. She stood with a map that she had coaxed into generosity and spoke not about the red but about the light that could replace it. She showed heliostat angles and proposals for turning 3 art pieces into a program that would throw real daylight into places that had been starved of it for years. Courtyard schools, shelter intake lines, the sidewalk outside the clinic where the winter line always curled around the block. You already own the sun, she said to a room that usually needed bigger dollars to be impressed. You just have to aim it. Someone from facilities asked a question that meant yes. Someone from budget asked a question that meant maybe. Someone from Halcyon looked at the ceiling and did math about how many contracts were slipping away and did not like the answer. By evening, the city had announced a pause on spectral crowd control initiatives that sounded bland enough to stick. The casings on the pier came down. The black cases at the stadium were locked in a municipal cage that made Davenport feel like a farmer who had convinced a fox to try vegetarianism for a month. The work went quiet after that, which is to say it got real. Kara spent 2 days learning how to stock an ambulance without making the oxygen tank and the bandages argue for space. She filled out an EMT program application with a borrowed pen and the kind of handwriting that improved with attention. The admissions counselor read her high school record twice and glanced at her twice more, as if trying to align the girl on paper with the woman in the chair. We start new cohorts in March, she said. You'll like trauma rotation. Kara nodded as if the word liked could be taught to do heavier lifting. Jade set up her laptop at a plastic table in a church basement and filmed interviews for a follow-up that wasn't about her at all. A volunteer who'd figured out how to refer a neighbor to legal aid, a DJ who played the same song at the pier and at a block party because he liked making feet remember themselves, a teacher who turned her classroom's 3 intact windows into a math problem about angles and made 14 kids look at the sky differently. She posted a clip of Naomi explaining spectral power in the doorway of the lab with a coffee mug and a smear of dry erase on her cheek. Half the comments were about how science looked good on Tired, the other half were requests for the heliostat plan as a printable PDF. Cassidy's comms team started pushing a new line about public-private learning, about how innovation sometimes needs spirited civic feedback. Investors did what investors do. Some pulled back, some wanted a discount. None dared call it failure to her face. In a meeting with a federal agency, Cassidy said, "We'll shift to citywide redirection in the short term," and smiled like she'd invented mirrors. That was the thing about her. She didn't lose. She migrated. She penciled the match a few moves ahead and waited for the board to catch up. Davenport took a rare morning off and failed at it. He sat at a lunch counter with egg on a roll and extra hot sauce and made 2 calls he had meant to make for months. One was to his oldest, a freshman who wanted to hear about anything except hearings. They talked about a class called Environmental Justice and why the maps in the textbook looked a lot like the maps in his office. The other was to an electrician from the stadium who'd texted him a photo of a new lock. "Looks good," he said. "Thanks." The man grunted. "We're tired of being part of other people's clever," he said. "We like lights that help." Miles worked a double shift in a neighborhood where the sidewalk knew his name. Between calls, he bought 3 boxes of daylight bulbs out of pocket and installed them in the shelter gym without waiting for procurement. He showed a teenager how to rewrap a sprained ankle so it felt like control, not punishment. He texted Kara a photo of the boy with the turtle from 2 days ago. The turtle in a shoebox, the boy holding up a tiny lettuce leaf like a trophy. Kara texted back a heart and then followed with a picture of a stack of textbooks and a caption, "Training to lift with my brain." At dusk on the 3rd day, the mirrors went live for the first official time under their new orders. The art installation angled itself at a schoolyard where the basketball court had been a damp gray rumor all winter. A square of gold lay across the paint like a blessing. Kids who had learned to play under clouds blinked and then ran into the warm spot and discovered their sneakers squeaked differently on concrete that had opinions again. 2 blocks over, one heliostat caught a stairwell outside a clinic in perfect light, and a woman waiting with a number in her hand started reading aloud to her toddler because the page was easier to see. Naomi stood across the street and pretended the wind was making her eyes water. Jade filmed from behind for once, so the clip was just hands holding a paperback and a voice making a room out of a hallway. The boy with the cap, his name was Ezra, they learned, came by the safe address with his mother, who had made cookies so precisely round they could have been drawn. He stood in the doorway and found Kara's eyes and did the small nod you give to a teammate you've already trusted with a ball. "We got extra light today at school," he reported. "It was warm." He held up the cap. She pressed the bill down so it sat just right. "Looks good," she said. "Looks like you." When the hearing simmered down to new language for existing rules and the comment sections bled into other storms, when the news cycle left for a shinier disaster and the city breathed out, the 4 of them found themselves at a diner with cracked red booths and a server who left the coffee pot even if you didn't ask. They didn't debrief. They decompressed, a slower verb. Naomi sketched a grant prospectus on the back of a placemat. Davenport stared at the pie case as if it contained an answer you could serve with a fork. Miles taught Kara how to make a paper football and flicked it so gently it barely moved. Jade put her phone on the table like a 5th person and then flipped it face down. "I'm cutting the doc," she said. "The last line is yours." Kara took a breath. Outside, a siren wailed and then didn't, a false start that left them all a little lighter. "Make it theirs," she said, tilting her head toward the window and the city beyond. "Maybe keep one thing I said. The part about not being a weapon. And the light." "That's 2 things," Miles said. "It's the same thing," she said, smiling. The call came anyway, because calls always come. A gas leak on a side street off Western, no flame yet, just the scent threading the block, and a grandmother who refused to leave her 4th-floor walk-up because the cat didn't like strangers. They slid out of the booth like a troop standing when the bell rings for class. Davenport tossed cash, didn't count, waved when the server shouted that he'd tipped like a Rockefeller. Naomi grabbed her bag. Jade palmed the camera, not to turn the moment into a story, but to take notes in case the next block needed them. Miles was already naming what he'd need. Tape, masks, a way to carry a cat without losing skin. They didn't need Kara to lift anything heavy. They needed her to hold the stairwell door while Miles coached the grandmother on breathing, to float just enough to coax a cat from under a bed without turning it into a chase, to answer a boy's question from the stoop. "Will it blow up?" With a solemn "not today," and mean it. The gas company then rolled up, 2 workers did the quiet heroics that never trend, and the block reassembled itself with the self-conscious humor of a mirror putting itself back on the wall after a scare. Later, on the roof of the safe address, they watched the city's nightlights draw themselves on. Airplanes stitched lines out over the lake. Windows lit up and went dark, stories starting and ending with no audience. Kara stood at the edge and let the mild wind push her hair back. "Yesterday felt big," she said. "Today felt right." "That's the job," Miles said. Jade leaned against the railing, camera in her lap, not filming. "The doc's ending," she said. Voiceover over the schoolyard mirror and the clinic stairs. "I was going to say something clever. I think I just want to say the thing we keep doing." Naomi nudged her. "Say it then." Jade did, the words quiet enough to be true. "Hope isn't a mood," she said. "It's a practice." They fell silent and let the line belong to the air for a minute before they took it back for themselves. In the street below, someone laughed the kind of laugh that bounces. A bus sighed. A kid on a bike did a trick imperfectly and then imperfectly again and didn't care. Kara stepped onto the wind and let it hold her. Not high, not a performance. Just a drift that put her level with the billboard across the way and the top of the sycamore that had somehow survived 3 decades of weather and a city that forgot to be gentle with trees. She looked over at the 3 faces on the roof. Friends, co-conspirators, habits she wanted to keep, and then out to the sprawl of light and brick and water and need. When the next call came, she would go. When it didn't, she would study and sleep, and eat soup that Miles claimed was medicinal and was actually just good. She would stand in doorways that needed bodies, aim mirrors that needed aim, tell a boy his hat looked like him. She would keep writing herself with small, steady verbs. She lifted just a little, and the city below adjusted its brightness by a fraction, not because of her, but because people were flipping switches for each other all over the map. It was enough to see by. It was enough to start again.